I just got asked this question. I want to bounce this off you guys. I did not like this. I did not like the tone of the question or the spirit. Like there was something about this that struck me, and I actually felt it right in the gut as a fan. If Islam Makhachev loses to Jack, does he drop back down to 55 and challenge for the championship, or does he walk away forever? Whoa. Whoa. I had not considered that. This sport is very different without Islam. It really is. Islam represents, and it's a massive umbrella. Not to mention, he is the heir apparent to King Khabib's throne. Like, it's a big deal. He's achieved what Khabib wanted him to achieve. As an athlete, you would rather serve that master than your own interests. As an athlete, that master's interests becomes your interests. Khabib, when he walked away, wanted Islam to hold down that division. And he did. He succeeded. Islam is now out on his own. He's gonna branch out to something different. I mean, don't forget, it's an uncomfortable conversation that none of us like to have, but everybody's had to have it all the way down to Coach Javier Mendez, which is, who's better, Islam or Khabib? We get asked it all the time. Khabib, slightly better record. Islam, more weeks at number one pound for pound than Khabib. Khabib, as a matter of fact, guys, only got 1 week, and it was post-mortem. It was after his career. I don't know how much weight you want to put on that. But we're splitting hairs. I mean, that's what this whole thing is when you have the absolute greats. And those two guys don't want that comparison. Islam doesn't want to be called better than Khabib, and Khabib doesn't want to have to step in and say that's little brother. Like, it's one of these awkward things, but I'm sharing for you as proof to my point that Islam is now going out on his own. He's doing it with Khabib, but he's going out. It's going to be different. He won't have to have that. He won't have to be in that shadow. We won't have to have these uncomfortable talks. It won't be relevant. It will now be Islam going to head-to-head with George St. Pierre. It will be Islam going head-to-head with Kamaru Usman. Right? With Matt Hughes, with the memory of, with the ghosts of, with the history of a different division. It's very interesting. So what would happen if he got beat? Would he leave the sport? Well, I certainly had not considered that. And to imagine that somebody as great as Islam would go out on a loss, but you are forced to ask yourself, why am I here? What is it I'm doing? And I know you will love to have a conversation about, oh yeah, but Islam versus Ilya, they got to get that sorted out. That's in your mind. Islam did his job. Beat anybody in the world around you at the time that you were there. That's your job. Your job's not to go beat a guy that came along after you. That's just not. That's for fans and that's for fun to talk about. But quite frankly, if those guys go out and settle it, which of course I'd prefer they do, but if they go settle, 10 years from now, we don't have the conversation. The conversation of who's better, I'll use St. Pierre versus Kamaru Usman, only exists because they didn't fight. Who's better and what would have happened between Chuck Norris and Bruce Lee, between Khabib and Islam? That only exists because they didn't fight. So there's an interesting thought there. A lot of guys they're fighting for championships. Islam already has them, is my point. A lot of guys are fighting for fame. Islam and that team, that's just not their thing. They just don't. It's just not their thing. There's not a superstar on their team. The way they operate, they're all equal. And I know that sounds like a nice thing to say, but how do you actually do it? They actually do it. They share each other's clothes. They drive the same vehicle. Whatever the champion of the world is eating, so are the teammates. Wherever the champion of the world is sleeping, so do the teammates. Like they're a real team. That's what they are. They're a real team, and that's just very rare in our sport. And then you have the money. And that is probably the last thing. Of all the things, that is probably the last thing that motivates Islam. So, with that in mind, it is within the realm that with a loss to Jack, that he stop. It would be very enticing, though, when you want to be world champion, it really doesn't matter in the athlete's mind where you find that. I know it does in the media, but it really doesn't within the athlete. He don't care if he does it at 55 or he does it at 70 or he does it at 75. If they want to call it interim or they want to call it undisputed, like the athlete just wants that title. Right, he wants that belt. He wants to be the top of the division. He wants the photos in the media and things to represent that when he gets spoken about. It's very interesting within the UFC. I'll make a point that David Taylor made. But if you win the Olympics, they will never say about you, he was Olympic champion in 2000, and they'll never say that. They will only refer to you as Olympic champion, and that's true. A lot of you, without thinking about it or using a resource, couldn't tell me what year Henry Cejudo won his gold medal, even though you all know that he won it and you refer to him as Olympic champion. But it's not like that with the UFC title. It's got to be right now. There's something about it that's different. And I just share that on one hand, Islam would be greatly motivated to get that back and does not care if he had to go down a weight class or have a more difficult task. It wouldn't be looked at like that. He would be so desperate to get that back. But I'm putting myself in his shoes. I don't know that fire would be quite as strong if it's to get something back that you've already had. As a matter of fact, you had it for so long, you returned it. I just couldn't imagine. I truly could not imagine being the best in the world and willingly relinquishing. I mean, you've got to be really good, and you got to be really confident that you can do it somewhere else. Ilya just did it. That's true, but that was slightly different. He didn't want to make the weight anymore. Jon Jones did it, but it took him 3 years, and it was very clear that he was the top of the division. And now Islam's in a spot to do it where they returned a world title to fight for a world title. I mean, it kind of feels like a wash, doesn't it? But there's something that motivates the greats. And Islam moving up against Jack is very different than staying and defeating Ilya. And as I chase my tail here, I'm well aware that I am making both arguments. I'm telling you both sides of the coin. But my final analysis to the question that I was asked, if Islam loses to Jack, will he drop down and challenge Ilya, or would he go away? Would he call it a career? I must tell you, as we deliberate, that answer to that question is one I do not know.